Welcome back to Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Brian.
And this is the Bible Bistro, a podcast
All about
the Bible,
theology, and all things related to the Christian faith.
Yes, well done. Well, we're back. Sorry last week.
Yeah.
Our schedules were not intermeshing. And so in the earlier days of this podcast, we recorded months in advance. We're like, oh, that's no good. And now we're like week by week, and we're like, this is insane. So anyway, here we are. It's happening. Here we go. But you're still on the road. You're still sabbaticaling down in Kentucky.
Yeah, it's nice. We've had a nice quiet time down here in Eastern Kentucky. So just filming. What do we call what we're doing? Recording from here today. So
yes.
We don't use film anymore.
Broadcasting from Eastern Kentucky, Hazard County, Eastern Kentucky. Yeah.
Podcasting.
Yeah.
No, anyway, we're not in Hazard County. We're in Knott County.
I can't get anything right. It's like, yeah, anyway. So yeah, we're back today. We're going to talk about something. We were kind of talking about topics. Hint, hint.
Yeah.
If you have ideas, hint, hint, please send them in, because that's the hardest part for us.
I was going to say the hardest part for us is coming up with the topics. That's why I know some people like the series when we do them, but the series at least gives us something to kind of work on. But
right.
It's when we come up with these topics, it's kind of like, what are we going to talk about? But you came up with a really good idea. You mentioned Jonah.
Yes.
And the funny thing is Jonah's come up a couple of times for me, even on this sabbatical. And so I thought it was a good topic, and I'd been thinking about it some. So that gave us a chance to talk about this. But I thought we are talking about Jonah today, but I wanted to begin with kind of a question to set us up, because I've really been thinking about some of what Jonah teaches us. And so my question to you, and I posed this to you yesterday, because you always complain about me just springing these things on you. So I thought I'm going to give you something in advance to work on.
Okay.
And I'm sure you put diligent effort into this question. So
poured myself into this question.
So my question was kind of, what does it mean to be a Christ follower or a person of God? I said it that way, because thinking about Jonah, and I said, what is our primary focus? What does it mean to be a follower of Christ? This kind of goes back to that discipleship episode that we had a couple of weeks ago. We've had some good response to that, but what does it mean to be a Christ follower? How would you answer that, do you think?
Well, again, because I did put some brain power to this. I think I think the thing for me is talking about is what does it mean that Jesus is king? And
right.
What does it mean for me to be a faithful member of a kingdom? Like, what is it?
Yeah, that's good.
So for me, it's thinking about, like, I have to make my interests parallel the interests of my king. Like,
okay.
the things that I'm pursuing, my actions, the things that are important to the kingdom and to the king have to be things that are important to me.
That's good.
Especially, if I'm especially as I'm a representative of the kingdom, if I'm outside,
Yeah, I think that's great, and we're going to use kingdom language here in just a little bit. I want to talk about some kingdom language too, because I thought about the Sermon on the Mount: seek first His kingdom, right? God's kingdom and His righteousness, and all of these other things will be added to you. And that's in a context where He's saying, don't worry about what you're going to eat, or don't worry about the things that you need, because God knows that you need them and He'll provide them. But seek first His kingdom. And I think you're exactly right. We are often distracted from our primary focus or our primary mission. I was just talking to somebody yesterday about, we have this term mission creep, where we kind of, as an organization, we use this in business, right? This organization is supposed to be focused on building widgets, but if we're not careful, we can begin to have our mission creep away from that. There's all kinds of other good things we can be involved with, but they aren't necessarily the primary thing that we need to think about. So the reason I asked that question is I think there are even Christians, I think, sometimes would answer that differently. Than you put some thought into it, some theology, the Bible, hopefully, and so there's some questions that you
appreciate that little stab. But continue.
So anyway, I think even Christians sometimes would answer this differently. And here are two ways I think we sometimes see it answered. And even this last week, with some of the controversy we've seen over, well, I'm not even going to mention it, but some of the stuff that you see in the news right now.
Insert your own controversy. There's plenty of them.
Yeah, whatever controversy happens to be going on when you listen to this podcast. So one of them, I think sometimes people think about being a Christ follower as maintaining a certain morality. In other words, there are certain things that we need to be practicing or not practicing in order to be considered a Christ follower. And so we judge someone's closeness to God depending upon their actions, right? Their list of do's and do nots. And please hear me, that's not to say that morality is not an issue. It's not to say that there are certain things that God calls us to, but I think the way you put it is the correct way. You said we want to be aligned or parallel. Sometimes we could say it this way: we want our heart to be in keeping or in time with God's heart. In other words, the things that He wants, we want in our lives, that kind of thing. The other thing I think sometimes people, and this may be not as much Christians as people from outside looking at Christians, and this is where I was talking about the controversy, is sometimes I think being a Christ follower is defined by what we're against.
Right.
We're against it, right?
Uh-huh.
And so, this is where you get people who are just so riled up sometimes because, Christians criticize this, we criticize that. And I think we need to be careful. Again, it's not that there aren't some things that cause us outrage. And again, but it's because it's God's heart, right? Things that hurt God should be things that hurt us as well.
And it shouldn't be that there aren't things what defines us. There are things that it's okay for us to be against. It's not
exactly.
It's about saying what we're against can't be what defines us.
Right. The story of Jonah, and this is why I'm kind of beginning this way. The story of Jonah, I think, is a period of time where God's people began to focus. It's given to us in this period of time where God's people began to focus on some of the things that were not the primary things, right? They began to focus upon their position with God rather than their mission. And so that's where I think, that's why I kind of wanted to begin this way. Being a Christ follower, I think, or being God's person is where we want to align ourselves with God's purposes and God's plan, and we want to make sure that we are carrying out His mission, is the way that I would put this. Okay. So that's kind of what I wanted to begin with, and we'll see how that goes. So you mentioned Jonah, and you're talking about the sign of Jonah, which we'll get to a little bit later. Jesus makes, in 3 different places in the Gospels, Jesus makes a statement about the sign of Jonah. We'll get back to. But Jonah as a book is a part of what we call the Book of the 12. What we call the 12 in our modern English Bibles, we call them the 12 minor prophets. But in the Hebrew Bible, it was one book or one scroll. It was these 12 smaller minor prophets that were kind of bundled together, and Jonah is a part of that collection. But even as I say that, Jonah is a little bit different in a couple of different ways. When you think about books like Amos or Obadiah is, we handled that when we looked at the Oneaters, right? The one chapter books. When you look at these books in the Bible, the Book of the 12, most of them are prophetic utterances. So they're full of God says this to Israel. God says this to the nations surrounding Israel. So here is the proclamation, and the prophet's job is to kind of be the mouthpiece, we sometimes will say, for God. He's speaking on, the prophet is speaking on God's behalf. Jonah's a little bit different because it's mostly narrative. Now, some of the other prophets have a little bit of narrative, but Jonah's almost entirely a story. And so some people will call it, some people even talk about it as a parable. It kind of has a parabolic nature to it. It's something that we lay alongside in order to make a point. So Jonah's different in that way. It's mostly narrative. There's a poetic, chapter 2 is all a poem, a prayer, which we'll get to. But that's a little bit different than the rest of the Book of 12. When you think about Amos or Obadiah, it's like The word of the Lord's here's what the Lord says. That's the repeated refrain. The Lord says this to Assyria. The Lord says this to Israel. And that was the second part. I said Assyria just then. The prophetic part in Jonah is, at least on its surface, not directed at God's people.
Yeah. This was the thing that always got me when I thought about Jonah. Is like everything else in the Old Testament is, I mean, yes, there's those prophetic utterances about another nation, but it's delivered to Israel. Like, this is a message to Israel.
And so your enemies are going to be defeated, for example, or Tyre, I'm going to deal with Tyre's pride, that kind of thing. Yeah. But the prophetic part here is directed toward the people of Nineveh. And Nineveh was a great city in this period of time, was probably the greatest city in this period of time. Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire during the period of time when Jonah is written. And so, they were kind of the people that you were afraid of. They were the people who were powerful. They were the people who were coming to get and Jonah is in the northern kingdom, and I'll say something more about that in just a minute. But those two things make Jonah very unusual in the book of the 12. Primarily narrative, it's a story, and primarily focused, at least again on its surface level, at Nineveh, not at God's people.
And Nineveh, again, Assyrians, these are not part of the nation of Israel, and these can be considered enemies of God's people at this time, or the nation of Israel, enemies of the nation of Israel.
Right. Let's talk about this time. So did you know that Jonah is actually mentioned in another book in the Bible? He's mentioned in well, go ahead and read Jonah 1 and 2, and I'll look at the other place, 2 Kings chapter 14. But you go ahead and read Jonah 1 and 2 because we get his identification here.
Yeah, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. I don't know.
Something like that.
Yeah. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me.
Okay. So Jonah, son of Amittai, is mentioned there, and he's given this message: go, arise and go. It's a double. We were talking about imperatives before. In Hebrew, this is a double imperative: get up and go. And the emphasis here is on the immediateness. Preach, but he says get up and go. It's kind of like do it right now. Like don't hesitate. Go and preach the word. So here's the other place that Jonah is mentioned. This is in 2 Kings chapter 14, starting in verse 23. And I'm just reading starting in verse 23 to kind of give you the context. In the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria. Okay, so Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom, which we call Israel during this period of time. And this guy's name is Jeroboam, but this is Jeroboam, son of Joash. So we sometimes will refer to this as Jeroboam the second. Do you remember Jeroboam the first?
Yes.
Now I'm putting you on the spot. Okay, who's Jeroboam the first?
Well, he's the one that divided the kingdom with Rehoboam, Solomon's son. He's the one that led the 10 northern tribes away from, the
10 northern tribes. Jeroboam, son of Nebat, is who he's named.
I didn't know the Nebat part. I will say that.
Well, that's fine. That's why you bring me along. Jeroboam the second, son of Joash, then is named after Jeroboam, which is interesting because if you read 1st and 2nd Kings, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, is mentioned over and over and over and over again. And basically, he is the standard for kings of the northern kingdom. And often what it says is he continued in the evil ways of his father, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, in the same way that David becomes kind of the Templar for the kings of Judah, the kings of the southern kingdom, Jeroboam the first. So I always think it's interesting. Here's what kind of mother and father are going to name their kid Jeroboam the second, right? Here's this named after this evil king. And it kind of tells you the way that the northern kingdom is going during this period of time. So anyway, that was a lot to say. Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria and reigned 41 years. So 41 years. He did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. He departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, he made Israel to sin. I just realized this is the King James version. I was worshiping in a church on Sunday that used the King James version. So I had it up on my phone, and so the rest of it's the NIV, but I'll go ahead and let me finish this since we're doing this. He restored the coast of Israel to Hamath, the sea of the plain, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke to the hand of his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai. There it is. Okay, there's the mention. The prophet who was from the village of Gath, something along those lines. So this can be dated somewhere around 755 BC is when we think Jonah's prophecy had been given. He'd already given this previous prophecy, and we don't have the details of it. All it says was that Israel was able to restore the coast and down to the Dead Sea as Jeroboam, or as Jonah, the son of Amittai, had prophesied. So the interesting thing about that, if you think about it, is so this is the northern kingdom. This is Israel, 755 BC. And it was a positive prophecy. Basically, it was what people wanted to hear, that Israel was going to prosper, that they were going to extend their borders back to where it was before. And that's what happened. So that was what Jonah's message had been to this point. And we understand the book of Jonah probably comes later than this. So 755, let me ask you this. This is another, we'll see how well you've done. So the division of the kingdom you talked about, what do we date the end of the northern kingdom? What's the typical date? Everybody knows the date which we date the destruction of Jerusalem. 586, 587 BC. Yeah. What about the northern kingdom?
I'm going to say late 700s.
Wait. Yeah. You got to remember, it's BC, so we count backwards.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, so maybe 720. I mean, it's shortly thereafter.
722. So we're talking about 30-some years later. The northern kingdom is destroyed by Assyria.
Sennacherib.
Right?
What's his name?
Yeah.
Sennacherib.
Sennacherib. Yeah. Yep. But my point is that this is the same capital. Nineveh is the capital city of Assyria. A generation later, 30 years later, they're going to be the nation that comes and destroys the northern kingdom. And there's
already been hostilities between them at this point. Yeah,
I mean, I would say it this way: everybody knows that Assyria is expanding its empire at this point. Everybody knows that they have their eyes set on. Yeah, the major superpowers during this period of time are always whoever controls Mesopotamia, which in this period of time is Assyria, and whoever controls Egypt, right? And so, Syria has its eyes on Egypt, and to get to Egypt, you got to go through the northern kingdom,
right,
and the southern kingdom, right? That's the way you go. And so, everybody kind of knows what's going on. They're aware of what the geopolitical situation is. So that's what God, in that context, then God says to Jonah, "I want you to go to the city of Nineveh," and basically he says that Nineveh. The wickedness of it. Did you read verse 2? I can't remember. Go ahead and read.
Yeah, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me.
So Nineveh's wickedness was, God had come before God, and so he basically tells them that. And instead, Jonah decides to flee to the ends of the earth. So read Jonah chapter 1, verse 3.
Okay. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port.
Yeah, go ahead.
After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord, Yahweh.
Okay. So twice there it says he's running away from God, basically. And later on, we're going to get a little bit more. He's going to give us some more about his motivation in this by the time we get to the end of the book. So I don't want to say too much about that right now, but let's just say he's running away from God's plan for him. He goes to Joppa, which would have been one of the few places that he could have caught a boat like this, to go across the Mediterranean all the way to Tarshish, which is in Spain. So I say the ends of the earth. Basically, he's going as far away to the west instead of going to the east in Syria. It's like if you're saying as far away as possible. That's what he's saying here by going to Tarshish. So that's what happens. And then in chapter 1, verse 4, so we're four verses into the book, there's a series of divine events that take place that redirect Jonah back toward God's plan for him, toward God's mission. Basically, God says to him, "You're not going to get away with this. You're going to do what I want you to do." The first one is, it says that God stirs up a storm, basically a wind against the boat that Jonah is in. And Jonah, meanwhile, has gone down into the belly of the boat and he's asleep. The sailors are all fighting for their lives on the Mediterranean here as this storm rages. And they're trying to figure out, is it one of our gods that's mad? Whatever is going on here. So then I want you to read, if you would, Jonah chapter 1, verses 9 through 16. So this is the response of the sailors to Jonah. And I may stop you in the middle here because there's two pieces of irony I want to make sure we catch in this narrative.
Okay. He answered, I am Hebrew, and I worship Yahweh, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. This terrified them, and they asked, what have you done? They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? Pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to Yahweh, please, Yahweh, do not let us die for taking this man's life.
Stop for just a minute here, and then we'll go on. So don't miss this. This is a pretty subtle point here. These sailors are Gentiles, right? You can even see it the way the word Hebrew, by the way, is very rare in the Old Testament. I did a paper on it once upon a time, but here Jonah identifies himself as a Hebrew, which is not the normal word that's used for this, but it indicates he's talking to people who are Gentiles, right? So he tells them, you need to throw me into the sea. That's what he says. That's the only thing God's mad at me. I'm running away from him. You need to throw me into the sea. That's the only way that this storm is going to stop. And these Gentiles are unwilling to do that. Okay. What they're doing, they have grace toward Jonah, right? They have this desire not to see Jonah die. It would have been very easy. I mean, the guy's saying, throw me overboard, right? He's not kicking and screaming. He's saying, this is what you're going to need to do. And they're unwilling to do that. We see something about their compassion for Jonah in this. Now, hold on to that because that's going to become an important idea.
And the fact that Jonah just didn't jump in.
Well, yeah.
That's part of the story. Anyway.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, it's, there's probably a reason for that. But go ahead. Finish the rest of this then.
Please, Yahweh, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Yahweh, have done as you pleased. Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared Yahweh, and they offered a sacrifice to Yahweh and made vows to him.
So they feared Yahweh, made vows to him. Now, here's the other part of this, and I want to say this in a way that doesn't give everything away. But so what does it mean to be a person of God? Right? Here, their interaction with Jonah has changed their perspective on God, on the creator of the universe, to the point that they are making vows. I mean, I don't know what you want to think about. Here are these Gentiles offering sacrifice to God, making vows of some sort to God, and fearing God. That word fearing God isn't just the idea of being afraid, right? It's the word that we use to talk about being a person who is a follower of God in the Old Testament, right? Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, is what the Proverbs say, for example. So you get what I'm saying is these people become converts. These Gentiles become converts because of what they see surrounding Jonah, not because he's trying to convert them.
Right. It's just their experience of what they've seen.
Yeah, their interaction with this person of God. And I think this is giving us a hint. Even here, it's giving us a hint of what the book of Jonah is really about. Is that God is interested in a relationship even with Gentiles. And in this interaction, even though Jonah, Jonah's not, trying to convert them, they end up becoming believers in Yahweh because of what they see surrounding this believer. thoughts on that? Any comments or questions?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of interesting for me, like thinking about, when they go back and they talk about, whose God did we upset in this? I mean, you get that idea that like they're polytheistic at this point.
Yeah,
They're
sure.
like, who, and then, Jonah's response is the Lord who made the earth and the sea. You know what I mean?
Creator God,
Creator God.
which is a normal way to describe the God, right? He made everything.
The God of heaven who made the sea and the dry land. And then seeing this, and yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting to see this. It reminds me a little bit of, just seeing what God has done through this person is what has changed. You know what I mean? Like this polytheistic people, these men on the boat are now making vows. I mean, it's an incredible story
It's an interesting, and again, you see kind of why some people see this as a parable. So enter the big fish. This is chapter 1, verse 17. The funny thing about this is, you mentioned this. Everybody thinks it's a story about, Jonah and the whale, right? Jonah and the big fish is what everybody knows. That's what we tell our kids and everything. There are exactly 3 verses in this entire book that mention the great fish. Mm-hmm. That's not really what Jonah's about.
It's about, right.
This is one of those divine interactions that God has with Jonah that's redirecting him, is basically what comes up here. So verse 17, the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Chapter 2, verse 1, from inside the fish, Jonah prayed to Yahweh his God, to the Lord his God. And then we have this prayer. I'm going to have you read part of it here in a minute. So this prayer, that's all of chapter 2. It's basically a poetic form of this prayer. We understand it, if we're understanding this as a historical narrative, which I have no reason not to. Jesus seems to think it's a historical narrative. What we have going on here is that Jonah, I think on reflection, is remembering his response. But this prayer brings up something very interesting, and I'm not going to say too much about it right now. Actually, let me read the first part of this. I said I was going to have you read it. I'm going to read down through verse 6, and then I'll have you pick up from after there.
Okay.
So here's the prayer. He said, in my distress, I called to Yahweh, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead. So that's the word Sheol there. Mm-hmm. That we usually understand to be the grave, right? Mm-hmm. From deep within the grave, I called for help. So what this brings up is, what exactly is the nature of this miracle? Mm-hmm. Is this a miracle that Jonah's life was miraculously preserved for 3 days in the great fish? Or is this a miracle of resurrection? Mm-hmm. Is he dead? Right. And God brings him back to life in order to do this. And I know that's not the way we normally tell this story or think about it, but I want you to listen to this language. At the very least, I will say this, that Jonah sees himself as good as dead. Mm-hmm. Right? When he's thrown into the ocean, he at least sees himself as good as dead. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the sea, and the currents swirled around me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I've been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head, which is an interesting detail. Mm-hmm. To the roots of the mountains, I sank down. So here we're imagining, the roots of the mountains would be the very deepest places. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. And pit here is another way that we talk about the grave or the abode of the dead. So again, whether we understand Jonah actually dying, mm-hmm. and I'm not saying you have to believe that, Jonah at least sees himself as good as dead when he's thrown into the water. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know if I'd ever thought about that. You know what I mean? Like,
And we'll come back later to it too, so we don't have to spend too much time on it.
Because there's something important. I
think so.
Yeah, okay.
I think so.
All right.
So go ahead and read the rest of this prayer then, and we'll go from there.
Okay. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Yahweh, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from Yahweh. And Yahweh commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land.
So that's the end of the fish story. So interesting couple things here. Those who cling to worthless idols. So that's a Jewish way to talk about Gentiles, right? Those who are idol worshipers, because that's one of the very first things. Don't make a graven image to me, God says. That's one of the big 10, right?
Right.
One of the first of the big 10. And this idea, those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. So this idea that God's love is what we have a defining characteristic of here. Their idol worship is turning away from God's love. But I will say, he says, salvation comes from Yahweh. I will be one who speaks about God's salvation, right? And here I think we're thinking about salvation of his life, whether it's God provides the fish in order to keep him alive, or whether this is the miracle of God being able to raise the dead, which my God's able to do both.
Right.
I mean, he's able to do either one he chooses. But I think there's some reason for us to think that maybe Jonah is dead and God is bringing him back in order to accomplish his purpose. Other thoughts or comments on that?
No, I think I again, as we talk about this later, I'm sure we will. Like, that's a very interesting idea that he might be dead here.
Yeah. So I say we see something about God's persistence here. Go ahead and read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 3.
Then the word of Yahweh came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you.
So, okay, Jonah, how about now? Right?
You want to do this again, Tiger? I can go all day.
The word of the Lord comes a second time. And here's what I think this is a great principle for us to keep in mind. And I say this often to students is God gets what he wants. It doesn't always happen the way that we're expecting, but God gets what he wants. And so, this is a message, I'm going to send him again. So this time the difference is Jonah obeys. It says, obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. He talks about the large city. He says it took 3 days to walk around it, which is, again, just talking about its greatness. And then verse 4, very short, this one verse gives us the nature of Jonah's message. Jonah began by going a day's journey into the city, proclaiming 40 more days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. Now, that's all we're told about what Jonah preaches. We're not, could he have preached more? It's possible. But basically, this is a warning. This is basically him saying, look, destruction's coming. He doesn't call for repentance. He doesn't hold out any hope. All he says is 40 more days and then destruction's going to come. That's the nature of the message. And yet the interesting thing is the Ninevites respond. So go ahead and you read verses 5 through 10. Yeah. And we'll talk about the nature of this response.
The Ninevites believed God. A fast was proclaimed, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. When Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. This is the proclamation he issued in Nineveh. By the decree of the king and his nobles, do not let people or animals, herds or flocks, taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink. Do not let people and animals but let people and animals be covered with sackcloth. Let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. Who knows? God may yet relent and with compassion turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened.
So what do you notice? What do you notice about that section? What comes to your mind as you read that?
I don't know if you're leading me here somewhere. I mean, it's just it seems strange to me. I mean, that seems very strange to me. That, I mean, they took the threat very seriously, but Yahweh was not their their God. I mean, I think that's the thing that's most interesting to me about this is like they were issued something and everyone, even the animals, were covered, and there was the idea that God might relent if they.
Why does it say? I want you to notice that. Why does it say he might relent? The king says,
and with compassion, because of his compassion.
Because of his compassion. So the sailors showed compassion on Jonah, right? Mm-hmm. Not willing to kill him. And here we have the Gentiles, the Ninevites, again, understanding something about God's compassion better than his prophet. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So maybe he'll relent. Now, the other parts of this, that it goes up to the king, all the way up to the top, right? I think is an interesting part of this. It's not just, a movement within Nineveh. It's not just those radicals over there. The king makes a declaration. He says we need to repent, and sackcloth and ashes is that sign of a profound sense of disgust with oneself. Fasting. Do you see the fast here that they proclaim, which again God sees as in the Old Testament he provides us a way of indicating one's repentance. But then beyond that, it's not just a matter of saying that I'm sorry. The king says you should all turn from your wicked ways. Right. I think he even mentioned. Does he mention violence in particular? I wasn't really following. I was just listening.
No, just from his fierce anger they will not perish. Oh, okay. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence.
Mm-hmm. So, in particular, he calls it for a change of behavior. So it's not just a repentance with words, but the king himself calls for a change of behavior. So the Ninevites, the ones, again, you're surprised by this, and I think that's the story. I think that's the reason for this story, is it's surprising. It's the people you would least expect to respond to this message, especially how poorly the message was presented, right?
Right.
But it's not really about the messenger. It's not really about the message. It's really about their understanding of God's compassion, and they're calling on him, and then he relents from the destruction that he's going to bring upon them. That's kind of what we see here. Now, when you presented this as a topic, you mentioned specifically the sign of Jonah. And I want to talk about that a little bit now. 3 different places, twice in Matthew and once in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus mentions this idea of a sign of Jonah. I think I have all of them here. I'll pull this up so you can.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if it was necessarily for me, even the specific places that it was mentioned. Like, there just seems to be some interesting parallels. We've talked about them before, like, when Jonah's getting ready, when he's on the ship and he's asleep, they're going to throw him in. Well, Jesus is also, the disciples are on it. Jesus is asleep. There's worry, and they wake him up. You know what I mean? Like, there just seems to be some strong parallels that are happening along here. Yeah,
absolutely. There are some interesting parallels between Jesus and Jonah. This idea of the sign of Jonah, look at this is chapter 12, verse 38. Mm-hmm. Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." And this is something that Jesus is criticizing them for in other places. You're always looking for a sign. He answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation asked for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." And it's interesting that he singles out the sign of the prophet Jonah. So we have to ask ourselves, what is that? And here's what he says in verse 40, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the large fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." So the sign of Jonah, Jesus sees as, I'm going to be gone into the grave, and then I'm going to be raised from the dead. That's the sign of Jonah. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons I think we need to seriously consider whether or not that's what's going on in Jonah chapter 2, rather than a miraculous preservation of his life by the fish. I wonder if he's dead and God raises him from the dead, brings him back from the abode of the dead in order to accomplish this. But then he goes on, he says this is the other part of this that I think the reason that Jesus mentions Jonah particularly. "The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemned it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here." And the implication is that you are not repenting when you hear the preaching of the Son of Man. So the Ninevites are held up as an example of those who responded to the preaching of Jonah and repented, as opposed to that generation. I found this interesting. You were talking. You sent me a podcast to listen to that was pretty interesting about the idea of the bringing in of the Gentiles as an important part of the message that Christ is proclaiming. That's really what this restoration of Israel is the idea of the Gentiles coming in. A couple things I'll just mention here is Jonah shows us, it's not the only place, but Jonah shows us that this is a part of God's plan from the beginning. I've said this before, it's all over the Old Testament. The Old Testament was never only about the descendants of Abraham. You can see that all the way from, Melchizedek, the passage we did on Melchizedek a few weeks back, whenever that was it a couple weeks? God has other people, right, outside of this family of Abraham that are believers in him. And I think that this is another part of that. The Ninevites, God is working in other, that's what we talked about there with that Melchizedek passage. God is working in other places. His work goes ahead of God's people in these. And so I think that's part of what this is about. These Gentiles in Nineveh respond in a way that Israel, that generation of Israelites is not. Second time Jesus mentions it in Matthew 16, Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. And he replied, when evening comes, you say it'll be fair weather, the sky is red, and in the morning today it'll be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. And it's kind of a, criticism here that you don't understand what's going on. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Then he left them and he went away. And so again, it's just mentioned there. It's much more, how do I say this, vague this time, but he mentions it here. Luke is interesting. I want you to notice this too. This is the Luke, what passage is this? Luke 11, starting at 29. As the crowds increased, Jesus said, this is a wicked generation. It asked for a sign, but none will be given except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was assigned to the Ninevites, so also will the Son of Man be to this generation. So a slightly different take on it there, that Jesus' preaching is going to be similar to what Jonah's was in his day, where he's going to give that warning of destruction. And so that's kind of what we find going on there. So that's sign of Jonah. Like you said, there are other parallels between Jesus and Jonah, but that idea of the resurrection being the sign of Jonah, I think is very interesting. Whether we see this as figurative or a literal resurrection from the dead, that seems to be what Jesus is playing on at that point. And then also this idea that the unexpected ones are going to be the ones who repent, not. So what does it mean to be God's people? Right? Is it the ones who seem to have that natural connection, or is it those who are willing to respond to the message? And that's what I think is the other part of what's going on.
Yeah. The reason Jonah is kind of interesting to me, it's just like it's not a book that I have in the past I thought a lot about. I mean, I knew the 3 days and the like Jesus in the grave. But I thought about the boat, I thought about 3 days in the grave, and I thought about I was reading a book and it was just like, it was asking the question, why is this in the Old Testament? You know what I mean? Like that it's not towards Israel. Every other book in the is towards Israel. And one of the things for me was thinking about Jonah his task was to preach, to a people that were not God's people. I'm putting that in air quotes here, God's people at the time. And I think about, that's what Jesus is doing. Like Jesus is, there's prophecy of Jesus towards his own people, but he's also taking a message towards those who are outside of his people at the same time. And I'm like,
Zacchaeus, great example.
Yeah.
Today this one has become the Syrophoenician woman. I tell you, I've not seen such great faith in Israel, right? He constantly brings up these people and makes these connections for people who even respond to his message in a way that his own, John, he came to his own and his own did not receive him. All these that's a part of the gospel. It's a part of the message of the gospel. And so, yeah, it connects with Jonah's message. So we got one more chapter to look at in Jonah, and I say that there's a shift that takes place in the narrative at this point. And I think it really begins to ask us the question what this story is really about. Again, on its surface, it seems like the story is about taking a prophecy to Nineveh, right? I mean, that's what it seems like. But then they respond. So, end of story, celebrate, But look at chapter 4. Read these first 4 verses, because this is where I mentioned before that Jonah tells us the reason that he did not want to go to Nineveh. And this is where we really get at his heart.
This is 4:1-4. But to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? This is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sin and calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." But Yahweh replied, "Is it right for you to be angry?"
So, I mentioned God's people sometimes are today are marked by what makes us angry, right? And this is this is kind of one of those examples. What's he say here? What he says, this is why I didn't want to come, right? Not because it was a hardship. He was willing to go farther to the west than it would have been to travel to the east. It's not because of hardship. Why did he not want to come?
Mm-hmm. I think what's interesting is he didn't want to come because he knew God was gracious and compassionate. But it's also interesting for me to think in Jonah's mind, he was probably giving that message again, like, go to Nineveh and tell them 40 days, I'm going to destroy them. And like he knew that the first time. Like I would think for him as a prophet, kind of going like, hey man, this is a pretty good deal. You know what I mean? Like, but even in Jonah's mind, he's seen like, but I know something about God, even though that you have delivered this, there is the possibility that these people will turn away from their evil.
Yeah. And Jonah says here, basically, I would rather die than see the Ninevites repent. I said to you when we talked about doing this, I said, Jonah's a heart check, right? It basically asks us the question, how do we view, if we're God's people, how do we view people whose God's heart is after? How do we view people that are different than we are, basically? How do we view the enemies?
Yeah. What is our goal and our aim? What do we really want?
And how do we view those who are scary to us, who seem more powerful than we do? How do we view these kind of people? And that's really what Jonah is about. So verses 5-9, he gives them an illustration of a plant. Basically, we don't have to read the whole thing. Well, maybe we do, but basically he's got a plant that's giving him shade. Jonah's very happy about this because basically he sets up a tent, and a lot of people think that he's probably wanting to see destruction. He's still hoping maybe they'll be destroyed.
Yes.
So it says he's gone and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a leafy plant, I think older translations say a gourd, made it grow up over Jonah to give him shade for his head to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm. It's interesting. It's very much like God provided the fish, right? God provided the storm. Very similar kind of language here. God provided a scorching east wind when the sun rose, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die, and he said, it would be better for me to die than live. But God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the plant? To which Jonah replies, it is, and I'm so angry I wish I were dead. Tells us something about Jonah's heart here. Basically, God is then going to say to him, you didn't make the plant grow. I'm the one who provided the plant for you, and it made you happy. And then I took it away, and you're angry and you want to die. The way I would summarize basically this message is that we become angry or happy about things that we have nothing to do with, nothing that is about us, right? So anyway, that I guess that's all I'll say. The kicker of the message then is this last part. I'll let you read this. This is verses 10 and 11.
But Yahweh said, you have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals?
So if we want to be people who are after God's heart, then we want to want the things God wants. And what God wants is not to see people destroyed. What God wants is to see people come to repentance. I have a passage out of 2 Peter that I always refer to in regard to this. It talks about, people who make fun saying, oh, where's this coming that he promised? He still hasn't returned. Peter basically says mockers are going to mock and say, where is this return? And then he says that he's not slow in keeping his promises, but he is patient with you. And then it says this, God is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. And when I talk to people about what it means to be a person of God, I say it's an interesting study to read through the Bible and look at the things that God wants. And one of the ways to really kind of align, you said become parallel, our actions become parallel to God's. One of the ways we can do that is to look in the Bible and see what God wants and then change our will so we want the same things, so we want what God wants. I've mentioned before, I think that's the change. It has to be an inside out. It's not we change our actions and then our heart changes. I think we change our heart and then it shows itself in our actions. And I think the book of Jonah teaches us what it means to have compassion like God has and to look at people the way that God does. Jonah is angry, and the book ends that way, by the way. Again, it's almost like a parable, right? You find, just like Jesus will often end the story, and it's kind of up in the air. God asked this question, shouldn't I have compassion on these people in Nineveh? So here's the so what before you ask me. Is how do we, if we want to be God's people, how do we view other people? How do we view different groups, people who are different than we are, people who think differently than we do, people who disagree with us even, people maybe we're afraid of? How do we view those kind of people? What would it be to see people through God's eyes? That's part of what I think is the story. The other part of the story, I think, is this. God is working, and he works through his people, but sometimes he works despite us, right? Jonah, the Ninevites did not respond to Jonah's great message, I don't think. It's not because he's a great preacher. It's because they see something about God's compassion. The sailors don't want to save Jonah because he's a great guy. Man, we're glad we brought him along in the boat, right? They want to save him because they understand something about the nature of God. And I think the judgment here in Jonah is really not against the Ninevites. I think this message really is for the people of God, for the Israelites. And the message is, are you seeing other people the way that God sees them? Or are you, in your prejudice, in your position yourself, thinking of yourself a little bit better than others, a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of bit better than others, and thinking about other people as deserving just destruction and punishment. So thoughts on that, or?
Well, that's something to think about. Yeah, how we think about ourselves and how we think about the world. I have to remind myself of this on a regular basis.
Yeah. So here's where it's come up for me recently a couple of times. Is we always talk about Jonah as a reluctant prophet. There's times that we've been called to go someplace. I talked about a Jonah moment when I first went on the mission field, and my initial response was no, and yet there were things that kept. God did not send a great fish and drag me down into the bottom of the ocean and drown me and then bring me back to life. But there were things that he did that redirected me toward where he wanted me to be. and part of it's trusting God that he knows what he's doing, right? But lately, and I got to be very careful how I talk about this. I don't want to say too much, but lately there was something that my initial response was absolutely no. And I had to rethink, where basically God was showing me, you've been complaining about this thing that's happening. This is an opportunity for you to go and speak to it. So that was part of it. And then I heard a sermon while I've been on sabbatical. And basically the sermon was, are we like Jonah, where even when we go, it's kind of like, I'm just going to go and show them, right? I'm just going to go preach destruction. Do we expect, and this is where it's hit my heart, and when you said that about Jonah, I thought, okay, yeah, we need to talk about this. Because do I expect that people can change still? Do I still believe that God is able to change the hearts of people, and that people are able to respond to him? Even people that I kind of deem as way out there or as enemies, do I believe that God can make a difference? And, part of it is recognizing it doesn't rely upon us. Part of it is recognizing that God is working in other ways. And, I still believe God has people respond to the message. So that's kind of the personal part of this for me.
Yeah. What's interesting is I had a conversation with someone this week, and they're asking me, it was about a marriage relationship. And it's something that had gone on, and I was like, when can we get divorced, or is it okay to get divorced for this, or and the issue at hand was not adultery or anything like that, and I just said, it's kind of like, is it okay? And I said, well, if you're a Christian, I guess the question I would want to ask is, what do you believe about the power of God? And that, can this person change? Do we believe that they can be changed by God, by Christ? Can they change? You know what I mean? And I said, I don't know all the nuances of the situation. It was a very brief conversation, but I said, we have to ask ourselves, what do we believe about the nature? Can someone change? Even if they've been this for years or whatever, what do we believe about the nature of who God is, and can he change? And then how do I respond? How do I live like that as a Christian? Just like for you, it's kind of going initially, nope, it's over and done. Like Jonah, no way. It can't be done. But then God shows up, and and then how do we live in that? You know what I mean? Like, what's our heart in the response to that?
So I guess I would say our takeaway, what I really think would be good for us as Christians, is to try to see other people the way that God sees them. Even this week, try to see other people, whether it's in the example you're giving of a relationship, whether it's an entire quote unquote group of people that we see in a particular way that we want to make fun of, we want to be angry toward, be upset about. Like I started the episode with, are we marked by what we're upset about? Or do we want to mirror the compassion that God has toward people who are far from him? And so that's all I've got.
Well, it reminds me of you're much better at remembering. Our battle is not against flesh and blood.
Oh yeah.
The powers and
principalities. That someplace.
Yeah, somewhere in there. But just that idea that we're dealing with people, just like how God says to Jonah here at the end, like there's all these people here. Am I supposed to abandon them? So I think this is a great message for us to think about. And
well, I think especially in our day of outrage, in our time of upset, I think it's good for us to be reminded of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brian, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah. And if you have ideas, again, I want everyone to know, I think one of the hardest things that we deal with on our end is trying to think of ideas or topics or questions that you have. If you think like, I've always had this burning question, please submit it. You can do it on the Facebook page or, you can go to, you can send us an email and go to the website and do all that stuff. But we'd really appreciate it if you got questions or something that you'd like for us to talk about. We'd love to hear from you, or if you like it or if you don't like it, all the good stuff.
Don't make us do a series on Deuteronomy.
We'll do it. Excellent. All right, Brian. Well, thanks.
32 weeks on Deuteronomy.
Well, Brian, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And
and remember, share this episode if you find it useful. Let other people know about the episode, about the podcast. It's helpful to us when other people become listeners. Lots of ways to respond, but that's for us one of the main ways is just share the news about this podcast. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Brian, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
All right.
And we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you soon.
Bye.